You see, we have trivialized the story. Whereas a man like C.S. Lewis and many, many others, including, as in Gulliver's Travels and so on, many have realized that truth can be conveyed in a story. And their person, who they are, C.S. Lewis say, is addressed to doing just that. Do you see what we've done is we've treated the story with contempt. It's not reality, it's not historicity. It didn't actually happen in our culture's history. It was not an event. It's a story. And we criticize it really. We say it's make-believe. It's pretend. It's imagination. And of course, as soon as we actually realize that, we realize also that, hang on, all of life is imagination. If I don't, first of all, think of something, imagine it, how can I hope for it? Our imagination is absolutely fundamental and crucial to life itself. It's the wonder that we have in no way come to understand. This phenomenon, as we might label it, of imagination. If you can only believe, it's in the Jesus story, if you can only believe. And when you pray, believe that you have received, in other words, exercise your imagination, your conceptual powers of how, if you like, the material world could be. That's how we're normally applying it. How the material world could be compared to what it is. And then we think, oh, I'd like that. And we start to hope that we can achieve it. And from hope, we start to create and have an attempt at it. And we end up with things that are not quite what we thought, but what we thought we were building. But, well, it's progress. Can we do better? And we imagine something better. So the contempt we have for the imaginative story is appalling. It's our key to life eternal. Because we can start to imagine that we know God. We start to imagine the nature of God. And of course, I think our God is the personification in our mind of the things we truly value. That we, from our experience of living in its totality to date, is what we value. Something of that we might value love and kindness and sincerity and all the characteristics normally applied to God and saintliness. And we distill that again in our imagination. We have the notion of values behind the events that we valued in life. And that's personified as our God. Do you see again? It's nothing new that this is life eternal to know God. It's simply a way of saying know what you truly value. The things that seem to give you life. At a trivial level it might be the house and the car, the career, the wife, husband, the children. But you're starting to move towards knowing, what do I truly value? Love, fellowship, kindness, cooperation, harmony, peace, joy, all the characteristics associated with God. Nothing new then to say, this is life eternal, to know Thee, the only true God. What's the true God that I worship? Who is He? What is He? And then of course we think, yes, well you're speaking by allegory, you are personifying the true values that you have. And you can turn it around and say, no, that is what person is. My values are actually what I am. And interestingly, people's values in that sense converge on something very similar. The importance of joy and peace and kindness and cooperation and harmony and creativity and integrity and so forth. You see, we misunderstood the person to be the physical body, a bit like we misunderstood the church to be the building, the temple to be the building, not the people in it, for any religion. We misunderstood the person to be the physical body instead of the values that we have. And we don't really understand, the values are intangible, aren't they? They're concepts, the visual part of values is the fact that they're concepts that we have, visual in that sort of spiritual sense. But we don't know what that means in other dimensions. And if we did, we would possibly be in awe of what personhood really is, as God knows it to be, if you like. So, the most profound things in our culture are our fairy stories. I say fairy stories, I mean our children's stories. And they enshrine various lines and threads and evidences of God. They lead us towards knowing our God. The prince who rescues the maiden. Well, there's goodness in there, isn't there? There's strength, and there's valor, and there's love, and there's protection, and there's beauty, and do you see it starts to enshrine all that mankind values in his heart? Because that's who he is. And if you have fairy stories, children's stories of war and violence and massacre, and it's not quite what we want to bring children up on. And we as adults, supposedly adults in our world, mess with such stories all the time in our entertainment. And we should be looking at whatsoever is good and lovely, just as we would feed our children. But instead we're feeding the mind with the horrors of life, the failures and the despairs. Because of course that speaks to us of what we're suffering from. But you see, you remain suffering that way. If you sing sad songs of loss of sweetheart, you enter more and more into the loss of the sweetheart and the longing for something else. Longing for her back again, so that's not the way to go. You're not supposed to enter into your illness. You're supposed to believe for healing. So we put our mind on the good and the lovely, whatsoever's good and lovely. We believe for something other than what we're burdened with, and the burden slips away. Because you're moving towards always in what transpires in your life. You're moving towards whatever you're preoccupied with in your imagination. Imagination is anything but trivial. It's the key to where your life is going. So, we might occupy ourselves with spiritual things and goodness because that's the way we wish to go. And another person may not. They may occupy themselves with violence and revenge and death and mayhem. And that's the way they're drawn, by their very imagination. Thank you, Father. Well, I've come full circle in my life, haven't I? From a contempt of fiction to an embrace of it as a tool of the imagination that brings us to experience the goodness of God and to know God. And the Christian story is that. It does not have to have been a historicity. For it to be wholly valid, utterly valid. And people like C.S. Lewis and so on, Daniel Defoe and so forth, and all what we call fiction writers, have tapped into this, knowingly or not knowingly. Case of C.S. Lewis, very knowingly, of course. And they have produced pathways to God, helped us come to know God. Yeah, of course there's good and there's bad fiction. Good and bad imagination, if you like. It could be moving society in the wrong direction. Trying to think of a, quote, good example of such. Hang on. Well, how about Machiavelli, the prince? I mean, it's a study, isn't it, of evil, really. And you could be using it as your handbook as to how to run a nation, couldn't you? There you go. That's quite a good example, I think, of imagination that can be used to lead you on a path to destruction. Except that even then, I suspect it's trying to point out a contempt for such ways that in some sense it is evil. And look, in fairness, I haven't read Machiavelli, the Prince. I don't think I will be reading it. I'll stick with John's Gospel for a while, probably a very long while. Thank you, Heavenly Father.